So we live in times where science and technologies are among the driving forces of societal development. Sometimes it is said that we live in a knowledge society. Therefore, science and technology, for their key role, should be accessible to everybody. So they should be conceived as public goods. But is it the case?
Indeed, if you look at the history of the 20th century, we can see that, in particular after World War II, science and technology have become the driving force, both economically speaking, but also socially speaking. But that, of course, opened up the question, like, for whose benefit are science and technology developed? What do innovators have in mind when they develop a technology? And in which way do they take responsibility for that? The historian of science, Thomas Hughes, has said this wonderful thing is like developers of technology do not only invent the technology, they also have to invent the society that goes along with the technology. And so the question is like, who is being heard when it comes to innovation and knowledge development? And in particular, if we think that innovations should be something like a public good, we have to ask ourselves who benefits and who risks. And you just have to look at an example like nuclear power stations and the accidents that has happened, for example, in Japan, that the people who benefited are not necessarily the people who did have to live with the risk, etc. So we have to ask these kinds of questions, like whose values are these innovations incorporating? Because every new knowledge and every new technology we develop contains an idea about society and where we should develop towards. And I do think we need to more carefully reflect on these issues in order to be able to really legitimately claim that it is for the public good. And as it's done right now, it's very often a pretension that it's for the public good. But we expect very much people to just believe that and straightforwardly embrace what is being done. And I think that's where the work needs to start, to more carefully think about who speaks in the name of society, how do we have to embrace these kinds of innovations. Always knowing that it's not about having or not having innovation, but it's about having what kind of innovation and for whose profit.
So the role of science in society is just one side of the coin. We should also think about the role of society in science. So how can we have a good public to deal with the decisions in which science is involved, very involved?
Yes, in a sense, we need to think about how scientific knowledge and technological innovations are actually produced today. When you look at universities, they are very strongly oriented towards a small set of indicators that prove their quality. But the quality should be one that is also their capacity to integrate societal concerns and societal voices in their work. And actually, there is a strong call for making more time and making space for actually reflecting on and integrating this different kind of expectations, knowledges, values into our knowledge generation. And I think there has been this has been voiced over the past years in many different ways. We have been speaking about a kind of participation, or we have been speaking about more inclusive forms of innovation, open innovation, all this kind of discourse around openness. But the point is really, how can we manage to turn that into a sustainable practice that is performed within the systems that generate knowledge and innovations? And we have not been very good at doing that. Because what counts for a good scientist is still good publications, that he gets third-party funding, that he gets international reputation, but not necessary. And it's good if he does also, or she does also, engage with society. But this has not managed to become a prerequisite to our understanding of being a good scientist. And I do think that's actually the challenge we are living up to. Now, this is a challenge to the university and to researchers and to research institutions, but it's also a challenge to the people in a way to how do you have to be ready to engage with science and technology. And this is not straightforward and easy because, for example, you have to have time and the mental resources, in a way, the training, the capacity to kind of engage. This is not straightforward and this is not easy for everybody. And so we have to consider and be very careful also about who gets voice in bringing societal actors in. And so I do think we need probably several layers of engaging with society to be able to bring in people and their capacities in different ways, because there is not just one public out there. There are many different layers.
Europe, for example, is giving more and more attention to these public engagement policies. And the aim maybe is to build a bridge, a mutual relationship between science and society. But where are we today, and what academia, what university can do better to build this bridge in these public engagement activities?
Yeah, actually, European policymakers, roughly since the year 2000, have started to increasingly underline the importance of bringing in different forms of publics, like also NGOs or patient groups and other kind of formations into the knowledge generation process. But we should not overlook that in comparison to the breadth and the amount of research money that goes into innovation, this is a total marginal element in it. If you just look at the big flagship initiatives, many of them do, or the really biggest ones, do not really spend a lot of time thinking about what their innovations might mean for society. And so I think the discourse is right. The realization is still lagging enormously behind. And that brings in the question of institutions, because the excellence discourse that is there at the same time with the participatory discourse actually makes it sometimes a bit difficult to reconcile these two ideals. Because engagement necessarily means taking time and spending time co-thinking and co-imagining the world. And time is one of the scarcest resources we have in academia. And so the question is, in particular for young people, where do they invest them? And they invest them generally more readily into the career-relevant kind of activities. And I think there is the responsibility of institutions, in particular of institutions of higher education, because we as universities train the next generation of young people, be they researchers or not. And that's the big question. They also go, most of them go actually, not into classical research positions, to become citizens that are kind of aware how important it would be to think innovation and society in one go, and to not only think about quantity, but to think about direction. And I think it's where do we innovate to, and what values should be realized through innovation. And I think that's a challenge for universities right now.
One last opinion. What do you think is the most, what are the most effective strategies to realize public engagement and science communications on the side of academia, universities, institutions?
The most efficient strategies are those who manage to have a multi-sided approach, because you need to go into different places, because you cannot see the society as a homogeneous other. But you have to understand it, and I think the society starts within institutions. It starts with our students, and it goes on to their families, to larger public spaces. So we have to have a strategy that is multi-sided and has different levels. And I think one would have, as institutions, to kind of think about how this is at least partially realized and kind of as a process integrated to the self-understanding of an institution.